So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks again for taking the time to join us today. My name is Glenn DeRoy. I'm the CEO of Tantus Solutions Group and am hosting this afternoon's webinar. Today is the fourth in a series of 4 sessions that we started back in late September, I think it was. Over the first 3 sessions, we spoke about IT health checks, IT strategic planning, and business cases, and today we're going to build on those and talk about IT budget. So it's really bringing a lot of those components together and talking about how it fits into the overall IT budgeting process. And our goal through these sessions is not to go into great detail, but to give you enough of a flavor of what these key practices look like, that we get a sense of how they can be used in your organization. In some cases together, in some cases separately. It really depends on kind of your current state and where each organization is at. And of most importance to us is really trying to articulate the benefit that these different practices can bring. Today I'm joined by Natalie LaBelle. Natalie is a director in our management consulting practice, has over 15 years of experience working in municipal government, academic medicine and research, and telecommunication industries. Natalie's focus has really been on designing and operationalizing transformative changes within organizations, and importantly, in each case, it involves positioning budgets to boards, councils, and key stakeholders, which is really going to be a focus of what Natalie is going to talk to us about today. So the good news is this is not an accounting overview. So we're not going to go into any of the really accounting principles. It's really about how you position a budget within your organization and what some of the key things that you can do are around that. So Natalie, thanks for joining us today. And just a note to those of you attending, we'll open up for questions at the end of the webinar. So if you do have questions as you go, if I could ask you to just note those, and we'll open up the floor for questions at the end. So Natalie, given that what we sort of position this as how you go about positioning a budget, what are some of the key points that organizations should remember when they prepare their budget?
Well, it's the preparation, and also, this time of year, a lot of councils are looking at the budgets and they're taking the reviews, which can seem quite exhausting, but it's the final stage of a very long year budget, so that's a good sign. So in this point, one key thing to remember is that IT budgets are funny because not a lot of IT budget dollars are always within the IT branch.
Right.
So you can have, depending on what research you want to look at, 20 to 40% of an IT-related spend outside of the IT branch. And I think a lot of people, when they present that, they forget that what people are experiencing with IT in their realm isn't necessarily controlled or even managed in the IT budget. So you gotta remember that. So sometimes it's called shadow IT, and I know that there's various feelings on that. Also, it could just be externally hosted, and the more and more we get into externally hosted, cloud-based, subscription-based programs, that occurs more and more. So people just have to remember that a lot of their spend will be in their budget, so the audience they're speaking to may not have a clear delineation between what is in an IT budget and what is in the IT strategy overall.
Right.
It's there. So we just want to keep that in mind, because what people are coming at this perspective with when they're approving, if they're not clear on that, and that can't be easily explained, then you're going to run up into a lot more trouble.
Okay.
And the other one is that IT, in a lot of eyes, is presented as a cost center.
Yeah.
And fair. It's very rarely going to generate revenue for most cases. But it's actually, if you look at where most municipalities are going and they're saying we want to do more with less, because I think that's, 40 years now of that? Something along that line. And you're trying to do, whether it be automation or streamlining, whatever the word is of the day, you need some sort of IT component.
Right.
And to do that, that means it's an enabler. So unfortunately, often being presented as a cost center, people forget that. And they either don't come to IT early enough to maybe take advantage of that, or they don't really value that investment in the context of the branch discussions.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the budget deliberations, it's really important for the IT branch to be able to say, here's how we're actually supporting all the other areas, which means using IT as a branch as a strategic lever and not simply as a cost center. And what I mean by that is, if the IT branch or department understands where the municipality is going, what is the strategy, and what's the strategy of their key areas. So for example, transit's always a big IT user and a big development area. That might be a strategic plan that you want to really understand and be able to refer to when you're presenting your budget back to councils and boards.
Right.
So it's a bit of a different departure from presenting just the IT budget, but I think it's important. Otherwise, it can be misconstrued as a big black box of money.
Yeah, yeah. A couple of things that you said resonate with me, Natalie. One is, your comment about IT in a lot of cases being viewed as a cost center. I mean, there's a lot of history to IT. If you look back, even as recently as maybe 10 years ago, IT was still, a bit of a backroom function, let's call it. Even the use of, not everybody necessarily even had a desktop, for example. Now, of course, IT is really a key tool for everything that an organization does in terms of communication, administrative support, but much more front-facing in terms of, consumer, customer-facing. So that transition has certainly, created some different challenges, as you pointed out, with positioning the IT budget. The second point is, that the importance of the link between IT and the business strategy, which we talked about when we had our webinar on IT strategic planning. That link is critical these days. Not only to positioning the budget, but to actually providing value and achieving the outcomes that the organization wants. So those are great points. So given that, what are some of the approaches that an organization and those accountable within the organization should incorporate when presenting their budgets to their stakeholders, to their councils, etc.?
I think the first thing is to understand that because IT, it's changed, as you mentioned. It used to be backroom. Now we have access, whether it be through tablets or desktop computers. So we have almost a false familiarity with what IT is.
Right.
And it is a bit false. So people don't always understand what goes in the back end of that IT budget. So it's really making sure that you can fight that perception of it being a black box. Because so much of the cost is in that maintenance and the background infrastructure that people don't really see. So even if they feel like they're fluent in what they're using for technology, they're seeing that end product. So you really want to scrape off that superficial layer and be able to explain in more depth what goes in.
Right.
And don't presume that they know. I've been in a lot of meetings where, some very smart people have asked, isn't there an app for that?
Right.
And we're talking about IT security measures and IT infrastructure measures. So it can be frustrating for the folks who are presenting, but it's really, really key that they understand that people are trying to understand what IT is composed of.
Right.
And not put those questions off, but maybe open with them.
Right.
And one way to do that is to break it down into more of a maintenance or sustainment, a growth, and an innovation component to the budget.
Right.
Because the approvers need to know, for example, with the maintenance, that can be in a municipality 75 to 90% of your budget.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about budget trimmings, we'll say, if the approvers don't understand how much of that is for those mission critical run operations and they try to make cuts, that's going to hit their operations right away.
Yeah.
So they really need to be able to understand that and understand what goes into that. Staffing obviously is a big component, but when we're talking about the ERPs and the licensing and the hard infrastructure for those, I go into an IT department and a lot of folks are always complaining about their sandbox. That means nothing going to the boards though. So how do you translate that over? It has to be thought of. Otherwise, that maintenance budget can really be cut into, and inadvertently so.
Yeah.
On the growth side, when we talk about growth, we're talking about adding new capabilities. So that has to be in line with the business strategies for either the whole municipality or different branches and departments. So if an area wants to go into either a new line of business or a new type of service delivery, which we see a lot right now going online, that's a growth, right? And people need to know that decision to go, say, as an online rec pass has a growth component because it's not a new line of business. We as a municipality, we're selling those rec passes for I don't know how many years now.
Right.
But if we're changing how we're doing it, that choice has an IT component. And a lot of the time that budget was, say in this example, in the Parks and Recreation or the Community Services budget lines and may not actually be realized yet.
Right.
Or it can be hidden, if you will, in a capital project and not fully understood when IT is coming up to present. So you just really want to highlight how you're enabling that and reinforce that message for the growth. Now that can also be timelined a little more flexibly, so budget constraints maybe for the growth, but IT has to be able to go with those business areas and say, if we're going to either ramp up faster or delay, here's the impact on our staff and on our resources.
Right.
You see a lot of projects in Alberta right now with the recreation replacements.
Right.
The timing of that, if you also are doing other ERP work, is going to be critical. That may not be easily conveyed when people are looking at their timing for their budgets. The third area on the innovation side, Everyone wants to be innovative and everyone wants to be creative, and that's fine. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. That typically, though, in a city is a fairly small portion of your budget,
Right.
but it gets a disproportionate amount of attention.
Right.
So you'd like to see that it's already going to get a lot of coverage, but they don't have to have the same time dependency that your maintenance and your growth certainly have to have, and they're often proof of concepts. So the message there is not only how do you want to do it, but how do you want to contain the costs and the risk that costs.
Yeah.
Because as a public steward, bleeding edge is rarely attractive.
Yeah.
You want to be modern and you want to be current, but you want to manage how much of that you're really throwing out as your risk.
Correct. Yeah.
So with that innovation one, I think sometimes people get very excited. They see a TV show, a movie, we want that, and perhaps don't understand the back end risks to that, the city operations, and we see that a lot.
Yeah.
So a lot of that conversation going on in the governments, but then they don't talk about the maintenance. So I think it's really important to have that balance of the conversation, and where possible, and you have those hot topics of, say, innovation or even new service delivery, link it back to the maintenance operations.
Yeah.
Because so often those exciting projects get all the airtime, and then people forget, the system we have had in place for 15 years, we really haven't upgraded, and now that's the thing inhibiting us from modernizing the rest of our infrastructure.
Yeah.
And I'll pick on systems like GIS for that. Like, it happens a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. The comment on the maintenance portion of the budget, Natalie, I think very critical. You agree with your comment that typically represents a pretty large proportion, percentage-wise, of the budget. I think a couple of things that we see is organizations typically underestimate the amount of sustainment required. So when you talk about the grow and innovate components, to your point, once those do move into a production system, steady state, whatever you want to call it, obviously there's a sustainment maintenance element to that. That's quite often underestimated. The direct costs, software maintenance costs that a third party might charge, those are well known, well defined, easy to articulate. The softer costs around sustainment relative to staffing costs, allowing for some ability to enhance those platforms over time. Those are elements that are quite often underestimated. And I think the second element of maintenance is around risk of not maintaining at an appropriate level.
And a lot of things get pushed off, and then you see yourself with a very large 7-digit plus bill.
Correct.
That you have to do in order to keep up with your operating systems.
Exactly.
And you see that quite often.
Yeah.
One thing, though, that I didn't mention on the growth versus maintenance is software's funny, because as you upgrade, you get all these other different features as a natural product, which we don't get in roads.
Yeah.
So you have this natural ability to sometimes expand your capabilities without making a significant change to your tool set, but just by modernizing.
Very good point.
So sometimes there's an advantage to take that growth initiative and see, is that actually something that can be worked in with the maintenance schedule?
Yeah.
And that's a lot easier way to pace that in. And it's also easier on your staff because you're not looking at new tools, new training on the change management side.
Yeah.
So often that is a way that can make a lot of parties happy.
Yeah.
That I think people may under communicate.
Yeah, absolutely, great. So, as with a lot of things within an organization, particularly IT related, there's a lot of work to do. So, where do people start? How do you sort of break this down into manageable chunks?
So there's a bit of a theme here with our webinars that works in quite well, actually. Part of it is, and this is certainly my bias, is there has to be an engagement strategy between the business sides and the IT sides.
Right.
And to be honest, I'm not even that comfortable with that vernacular. We call it the business and IT, and that's a historical remnant coming in. And nowadays, you can't do very many interesting projects without engaging both sides. So there has to be some sort of deliberate engagement of that to cross that barrier. And that's not to say that everyone on the business side wants to know the IT details or vice versa, but there have to be some champions that have a regular discussion and outside of a formal meeting structure sometimes, but actually build up that partnership. So ideally you want to start with an engagement strategy. It doesn't have to be a discrete project, but more of an approach that you sketch out. And one way to start that off fairly quickly is with, I'll just call them whiteboard sessions. Getting some of these champions in the room in a very open conversation where we're talking about the actual pain points, the misunderstandings. Sometimes it's historical. I mean, we've all worked with folks that can tell you, 10 years ago this happened, and they still don't want to go forward. Mm-hmm. They have that bias. A lot has changed. So we really want to get people in the room, get that conversation facilitated in a way that is very open, very honest, and might only take 1 to 2 days in time over, say, 2 to 4 sessions.
Right.
And you have that feedback. That's a great way to kickstart it out. And actually, post this budget season, I would suggest that's a good way to kick off the new year.
Right.
And have that as a bit of a new. Now, the other part of that afterwards is to take a look, and this is more IT specific. And we spoke about the IT health checks. It's really important though, is the IT operation healthy enough?
Mm-hmm.
Because as we're opening this up to the other business areas and trying to be engaging, if we come back and say, yes, but this system is now basically defunct and we can't afford to make that change, you're opening a door that is basically got nothing behind it.
Right.
So you want to take a look to make sure, is your organization healthy enough and you know what levers you want to push to make some of these big changes. And then it can be a nice partnership of, oh, we have a business need and an IT need, let's go forward. Or at least your worst case scenario is a very open conversation as to why something actually doesn't work.
Right.
As you can look for different options.
Right.
The IC strategy, which we've mentioned as well before,
Yeah.
absolutely critical. And for that to be successful, that engagement strategy is key. So not getting people to the room for a meeting, but getting them actually in this dialogue. The idea with the IT strategy, you want to formalize that, document it, verify it, but also keep those relationships open so when things do change and scheduling has to be there, the strategy is actually something that's not a theory or a paper, but something that people are living.
Mm-hmm.
So you really want to make sure that everyone there understands what the IT strategy is, how that links to the overall municipal strategy, and to be very personal, their own branch or department strategy.
Right.
Because everyone wants to get their things in. So we need to have them engaged there. And how, on the IT budget side, what the other business areas want and how that IT strategy links into the IT budget itself.
Yeah.
And how it's complex. So that's part of the IT strategy.